It's 1999, and Russia is on the brink of the 21st century, struggling with economic turmoil, political instability, and an uncertain future. Enter Vladimir Putin, a former KGB officer with a sharp mind and a no-nonsense attitude. Little did anyone know that this relatively unknown figure would soon become one of the most powerful and controversial leaders of the modern world. Now let's fast forward from the chaos of post-Soviet Russia to the rich tapestry of its past. From the legendary Rurik to the formidable Tsar Peter the Great, and from the revolutionary fervor of the October Revolution to the rise of Putin, Russia's history is as complex and fascinating as its modern politics. Today we're going to take a whirlwind tour through over 1,000 years of Russian history, highlighting the events and personalities that have shaped this vast and enigmatic nation. So fasten your seatbelts and prepare for a journey through time, as we uncover the epic saga of Russia from its Viking origins to its place on the global stage today. And remember, whether you're navigating the intrigues of the Kremlin or the mysteries of Russian history, one thing is clear in Russia: history never stands still. Our journey begins in the vast, frigid lands that would one day be known as Russia and Ukraine, where nomadic tribes once roamed, leaving behind little more than mysterious graves and kurgans, essentially ancient burial mounds, or as I like to call them, the original Russian dollhouses. The real fun begins when the Vikings, known as Varangians in the east, decided to paddle their way down Russia's rivers, perhaps because conquering freezing waters sounded like a great time. According to legend, the Slavs, tired of their endless tribal squabbles, invited a Varangian chieftain named Rurik to bring some order to the chaos. Rurik, never one to pass up an opportunity for power, set up shop in Novgorod, and just like that, the Rurik dynasty was born. His people, calling themselves the Rus, gave their name to the land. Rurik's successor, Oleg, had a grand vision, moving the capital to Kiev, where the Rus state would thrive. Fast forward a century, and we meet Vladimir the Great, who decided that the best way to secure alliances with the Byzantine Empire was to convert to Orthodox Christianity. Vladimir's decision to baptize his people secured his place in history as the man who made sure church bells echoed across the land. But peace and prosperity, as we all know, tend to attract the wrong kind of attention. Enter the Mongols, those terrifying horsemen from the east who had a particular knack for overrunning civilizations. After a brief visit to teach the Slavs the meaning of fear at the Battle of the Kaka River, they returned 14 years later with a full-blown invasion. Batu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, led his massive army across the steppe, burning cities and teaching the Rus a few hard lessons about survival. Novgorod, however, was spared, thanks to its savvy Prince Alexander Nevsky, who decided that paying tribute was preferable to annihilation. But Nevsky wasn't just a passive leader. He turned around and defeated the Teutonic Knights at the Battle of the Ice, earning his place in Russian legend. The Mongols ruled over Russia under the Golden Horde, collecting tribute like the world's most ruthless landlords. This period, known as the Tatar Yoke, wasn't exactly Russia's golden age, but it did set the stage for the rise of Moscow, a small principality that would eventually become the heart of a vast empire. As the Golden Horde's grip on Russia weakened, the Grand Principality of Moscow, led by Dmitry Donskoy, decided it was time to fight back. At the Battle of Kulikovo Field, Dmitry delivered a crushing blow to the Tatars, proving that Moscow was more than just a city of wooden huts. When Constantinople fell to the Ottomans, some ambitious Russians declared Moscow, the Third Rome, the last bastion of Orthodox Christianity. Under the leadership of grand princes like Ivan III, Moscow expanded its power, annexing Novgorod and declaring itself the ruler of the first Russian state. By the time Ivan III faced down the Tatars at the Ugar River, Russia had finally thrown off the Tatar yoke. Ivan III's son, Vasily III, kept the expansion going, but it was his son, Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible, who really put Russia on the map, though not always in the best way. Ivan crowned himself the first Tsar of Russia and set out to conquer the Tatar lands of Kazan and Astrakhan. Unfortunately, his modernization efforts soon spiraled into a reign of terror, complete with mass executions fueled by his paranoia. Let's just say you didn't want to be in the same room when Ivan had a bad day. Ivan's death led to what historians delicately call the time of troubles. Picture this: famine, plague, foreign armies running amok, and the throne being seized by impostors faster than you can say, "Who's the Tsar?" Today it was a time of chaos, with the Polish occupying Moscow. the Swedes grabbing Novgorod, and Russia teetering on the brink of dissolution. But Russia loves a good comeback. In 1612, a merchant named Kuzma Minin and a prince named Dmitry Pozharsky led a militia that kicked the Polish garrison out of Moscow. This heroic feat is still celebrated as Russian National Unity Day, which is basically Russia's way of saying, we might fight among ourselves, but if you invade, we'll unite and kick you out. Realizing that someone needed to be in charge, the Russian Assembly, the Zemsky Sobor, elected a 16-year-old noble named Mikhail Romanov as the next Tsar. Thus the Romanov dynasty was born, destined to rule for the next 300 years. Mikhail's reign brought stability, and his son, Tsar Alexei, introduced a new legal code that effectively turned 80% of Russians into serfs, a system that would dominate Russian life for the next 2 centuries. Fast forward a bit, and we meet one of Russia's most famous leaders, Peter I, later known as Peter the Great. Peter wasn't content with just ruling Russia, he wanted to transform it into a European superpower. To do that, he needed allies, science, and most importantly, a navy. So Peter went on a European tour, learning the latest in shipbuilding and picking up a few fashion tips like how to shave. He liked the idea so much that he made Russian nobles shave too, and if they refused, he taxed their beards. Yes, a beard tax only in Russia. Peter also built a new capital on the Baltic coast, St. Petersburg, which, despite the lives of thousands of serfs, became a symbol of Russia's modernization. The Great Northern War against Sweden was a rocky start, but Peter eventually turned the tide, crushing the Swedes at the Battle of Poltava. With the Treaty of Nystad, Russia emerged as the dominant Baltic power, and Peter was declared father of his country, emperor of all the Russias. After Peter came a series of rulers who didn't quite live up to the great title. There was Empress Anna Ioannovna, known more for her extravagant lifestyle than for governing, and then a few other rulers who shuffled through the throne, including Ivan VI, who spent his life in captivity before being murdered in a failed rescue attempt. But then came Catherine the Great, who, despite being German and deposing her own husband, Peter III, managed to oversee one of Russia's most glorious periods. Like Peter, Catherine was fascinated by European ideas, especially those of the French Enlightenment. She corresponded with Voltaire and reigned as an enlightened autocrat promoting reason, tolerance, and progress. Under her rule, schools and colleges flourished, the Bolshoi Theater was founded, and her art collection laid the foundation for the Hermitage Museum. Catherine also expanded Russia's borders significantly, defeating the Ottoman Empire and annexing the Crimean Khanate, a thorn in Russia's side for 300 years. The territories she gained were named Novorossiya, or New Russia, and were settled by Russian colonists under the supervision of her advisor and occasional lover, Prince Potemkin. However, Catherine's reign wasn't all sunshine and enlightenment. A major peasant revolt led by the renegade Cossack Yimli and Pugachev shook the empire, but Catherine's forces eventually crushed the rebellion. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was another casualty of Catherine's ambitions, as it was carved up in a series of partitions, with Russia taking the lion's share. Catherine's later years were marked by growing conservatism, especially after the French Revolution, which terrified her. By the time she died, Russia was more autocratic than ever. The 19th century in Russia was a time of great change, and not all of it was positive. After Catherine, her son Paul I tried to undo much of her work, but he didn't last long before being assassinated in a palace coup. His son Alexander I took over, sharing his grandmother's vision for a modern Russia, but being more cautious in his reforms. During Alexander's reign, Russia faced its greatest challenge yet, Napoleon Bonaparte. After initial defeats, the Russian army held its ground, and when Napoleon invaded Russia in 1812, it turned out to be one of his biggest mistakes. The French army captured Moscow, only to find it in flames, and as winter set in, they were forced to retreat. The Russian winter, along with constant harassment by Russian forces, annihilated Napoleon's Grand Army, and Russia emerged victorious, leading the final push to capture Paris in 1814. Alexander's victory over Napoleon confirmed Russia's status as a world power, but it also sparked new ideas among Russian intellectuals and army officers. Inspired by European liberalism, they began to question Russia's autocratic system. This discontent boiled over after Alexander's death, leading to the Decembrist Revolt in 1825. Unfortunately for the rebels, the new Tsar, Nicholas I, wasn't in the mood for change. He crushed the revolt and introduced a new doctrine of orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality, firmly rejecting European liberalism. Nicholas I's reign was marked by repression at home and expansion abroad. Russia continued its wars against the Ottoman Empire, gaining new territories in the Black Sea region. But it was the Crimean War that exposed Russia's weaknesses as it struggled against an alliance of Britain, France, and the Ottoman Empire. The war ended in a humiliating defeat for Russia, forcing it to rethink its place in the world. Alexander II, Nicholas's son, took the lesson to heart. Recognizing that Russia was falling behind its European rivals, he embarked on a series of reforms, the most significant of which was the abolition of serfdom in 1861. This earned him the nickname the Liberator, but the reality was that most former serfs remained trapped in poverty. Alexander II also introduced local self-government through the Zemstvia, and in the Far East he expanded Russian territory at the expense of China. But Alexander II's reforms didn't go far enough for some. Radical groups, frustrated by the slow pace of change, attempted to assassinate him several times. In 1881 they succeeded, throwing a bomb at his carriage in St. Petersburg. His death marked the end of an era of cautious reform and the beginning of a new period of repression under his son, Alexander III. Alexander III was a conservative who believed his father's reforms had gone too far. He reasserted autocratic rule and cracked down on revolutionary movements. His reign saw the rise of the secret police, the Okranka, and a wave of anti-Jewish pogroms that led many Russian Jews to emigrate, mostly to the United States. Alexander III's son, Nicholas II, is best known as the last Tsar of Russia. His reign was marred by tragedy and misfortune from the start. His coronation in 1896 was overshadowed by the Kadynka tragedy, where over 1,400 people were crushed to death during a celebration in Moscow. Things didn't get much better from there. Under Nicholas II, Russia faced growing internal unrest and external challenges. The disastrous Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905, in which Russia was soundly defeated by Japan, exposed the weaknesses of the Russian military and led to widespread discontent at home. The 1905 revolution followed, forcing Nicholas to issue the October Manifesto, which promised reforms and the creation of a state Duma, or elected assembly. But Nicholas was reluctant to share power, and the Duma became little more than a rubber stamp. As if things weren't bad enough, Russia got involved in World War I, a conflict it was woefully unprepared for. The Russian army suffered massive casualties, and the home front was plagued by food shortages and economic chaos. Nicholas's decision to take personal command of the army only made matters worse, leaving the government in the hands of his unpopular wife, Alexandra, and her mystic advisor, Grigory Rasputin. By 1917, the situation had become untenable. The February Revolution forced Nicholas to abdicate, ending 300 years of Romanov rule. A provisional government took power, but it was unable to stabilize the country. Meanwhile, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, were gaining support with their promises of peace, land, and bread. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks launched a coup, seizing power and arresting the members of the provisional government. Lenin and the Bolsheviks now controlled Russia, setting the stage for the Russian Civil War, one of the bloodiest conflicts in history, which would eventually lead to the establishment of the Soviet Union. And there you have it, the entire history of Russia, from its Viking beginnings to the revolution that changed the world. It's a tale of ambition, conquest, reform, and revolution, filled with larger-than-life characters who left their mark on history. Russia's story is far from over, but today we've journeyed through the highs and lows, the triumphs and tragedies that shaped one of the world's most fascinating nations. Thank you for joining me on this whirlwind tour now. Who's up for a little tea and some Tolstoy?